Before the war, Samuel and Victor were known in their village simply as the brothers who never walked apart. One was quiet, the other restless. One collected books, the other collected scraped knees. Their mother used to joke that they were born in different seasons but carried the same heartbeat. By the time the war cast its long shadow over their home, the brothers had already learned to navigate life as if it were a shared task. One listened, the other spoke. One planned, the other leaped. But no rhythm, no bond, no childhood loyalty could prepare them for the moment soldiers arrived and everything familiar collapsed around them. They were taken together, shoved into the same train car along with dozens of others, neighbors, strangers, people who had once been teachers, bakers, tailors. Victor stood beside Samuel the entire journey, gripping his brother's wrist so tightly that the bruise lasted 4 days. The camp gates rose like a skeletal frame in the distance, and for a brief, imposable moment, Victor whispered, "We're leaving together, no matter what happens." It was a promise he made with the desperation of someone who knew the world was becoming smaller by the hour. Inside the camp, their paths diverged almost immediately. Victor, older and stronger, was pulled into heavy labor. Samuel, whose health had always been fragile, was assigned to tasks that required less physical strength but came with a different kind of cost. Even so, at night, when they managed to find each other near the barracks, they spoke in hurried whispers, clinging to scraps of memory. They made plans they didn't believe in, imagined futures they couldn't picture. Every night ended the same way. Victor repeating the promise, "We enter together, we leave together." Winter shattered that illusion. Work assignments became harsher, food rations became smaller. Illness moved through the camp with silent efficiency. Victor watched Samuel shrink into himself, still gentle, still trying to smile, but fading at the edges. There were days when Samuel's hands trembled too much to tie his own shoes, nights when his breathing turned shallow, interrupted by bouts of coughing he tried to hide. Victor pretended not to notice, because noticing meant acknowledging the cracks forming in his promise. Then came the job selection. A guard walked through the yard, reading names from a clipboard. Some were reassigned to new labor groups, others were separated with no explanation. When Samuel's name was called for a special work detail, Victor felt the ground slide beneath him. He stepped forward instinctively, asking, begging to switch places. The guard laughed, not cruelly, but with the indifference of someone who had long stopped seeing faces. "Brothers," he said. "The camp does not care about brothers." Samuel touched Victor's arm softly, the way he had when they were boys facing something frightening. "It's fine," he whispered. "It's just another assignment." But Victor saw the fear behind his brother's eyes. He saw the truth. They both understood, but neither dared to say aloud. People who joined special details rarely returned. The next morning, Samuel was gone, taken with a group whose destination was never explained. Victor searched for him obsessively, questioning anyone who might have seen him. Some had, some hadn't. Stories contradicted each other. The camp was full of echoes, not answers. Days turned into weeks. Winter held its breath. And then, one day, Victor heard news from a prisoner who had worked near the administrative office. A transport list had been posted, and Samuel's number was on it, not on a roster of returning workers, but on a ledger used for transfers that never came back. The world inside Victor hollowed out. He staggered behind one of the barracks, gripping the wall to stay upright. Everything felt distant as shouts, the footsteps, the cold. Only one thing remained sharp, the memory of his own voice whispering a promise he could no longer keep. "We're leaving together." In the days that followed, Victor moved through the camp like a ghost wearing a living man's body. He worked, he ate, he slept, but every action felt disconnected, as if he were performing tasks for someone else. Some prisoners believed he had lost hope entirely. Others thought he was planning something reckless. The truth was simpler and heavier. He was grieving someone who had been taken without goodbye, without certainty, without a grave. But grief, when carried quietly, becomes a kind of defiance. Victor began noticing things, patterns in guard rotations, gaps in supervision, small opportunities hidden between routines. He refused to let his brother's memory dissolve into the machinery of the camp. If Samuel could not leave, Victor would carry something of him out. His promise, reshaped, but unbroken. He whispered Samuel's name to himself every night, like a vow meant for a future he did not yet see. If only one brother left the camp, he would make sure the world knew why. In the weeks that followed, Victor learned to live with a kind of double vision. On the surface, he moved like every other prisoner head down. Steps measured, eyes fixed on the ground, to avoid the wrong kind of attention. But beneath that, his mind worked constantly, replaying Samuel's last smile, his last words, his last moment of certainty. It was as if Victor carried two versions of time inside him: the brutal rhythm of the camp, and the softer echo of the world where his brother still existed. The contrast was unbearable, but it kept him alive. The men in Victor's work, Dite, noticed the shift. They didn't speak of it directly. Talking openly about grief was dangerous, but they felt it. One of them, an older man named Hirsch, approached him late one evening when the barracks had settled into exhausted silence. "Loss changes the air around a man," Hirsch whispered, "but it can sharpen him too." Victor didn't respond, but Hirsch continued, "Your brother, he meant something to you. Hold on to that. The ones who forget what they've lost, they're the ones who vanish." Victor hadn't realized until then how visible his grief had become, how it clung to him like another layer of clothing. He had tried to hide it, believing that showing pain was the same as showing weakness. But Hirsch's words stayed with him. Maybe grief didn't have to crush him. Maybe it could anchor him. As winter began to thaw into mud, a rumor spread quietly among the prisoners. A transport was being organized. Group of men would be moved to a labor site outside the camp. Leaving didn't guarantee safety, but it meant movement. And movement meant possibility. Victor listened carefully, not because he hoped for rescue, but because any shift in the camp's routine could create openings, and openings were all he had left. One evening, as he returned from work, he found a scrap of cloth tucked under his pallet. At first, he thought it was trash, but then he noticed the stitching, 3 uneven blue threads looping together. It was a symbol he recognized instantly. When they were children, Samuel had devised a secret code for hiding messages from their parents. 3 loops means, "I was here," Samuel had explained proudly at age 7. Victor held the cloth to his chest, the threads trembling in his hands. Someone had been with Samuel before he disappeared. Someone wanted Victor to know. The next morning, he scanned the faces around him, searching for the smallest flicker of familiarity. It wasn't until midday that he noticed a young prisoner staring at him during a brief pause in their labor. The boy's gaze was steady, almost deliberate. When the guard turned away, the boy murmured, "Don't react." His voice was barely audible. "I worked with your brother." Victor's breath caught. The boy continued, still not looking at him, "I can't talk long, but he wanted you to know he was thinking of you." It was the first confirmation Victor had received, proof that Samuel had been alive long enough to send a message, proof that he hadn't simply vanished. That night, Victor lay awake, replaying every detail of the boy's words. He clung to them as if they were a rope lowered into a well. The camp had taken everything from him except this, the knowledge that Samuel had remembered him to the very end. But the momentary comfort gave way to another thought, one darker, heavier. If Samuel had slipped Victor a message, it meant he knew he might not survive. It meant he had wanted his brother to carry something he couldn't. The next day, the boy approached Victor again, this time while they moved lumber from one part of the yard to another. He spoke without turning his head. "Your brother. He wasn't sick. He wasn't weak. He was chosen." Chosen. The word felt like a knife. The boy's voice tightened. He tried to protect someone. That's why he was taken. Victor's heart slammed in his chest, but before he could respond, a guard barked an order, and the moment ended. That night, Victor felt a crack open inside him, not of despair, but of purpose. If Samuel had been taken for protecting someone, then Samuel had died making a choice, a brave one. A choice that reflected everything Victor had always believed about him. It was a truth that filled Victor with a strange, burning clarity. He looked around the barracks, at the hollow-eyed men who went to sleep each night, not knowing if they would wake, at the men who had long stopped believing in anything. And he realized something. Samuel would never have wanted him to fade into that same darkness. If Victor was the one who survived, Then he had a responsibility not to escape, but to witness. Witnessing, he thought, was a form of survival. In the following days, Victor began paying attention to details he had previously ignored. The Roots guards took on patrol, the order in which prisoners were counted, the whispers of transports, the quiet shuffling of paperwork near the administrative offices. He wasn't planning an escape. He knew how impossible that was, but he was preparing, quietly, for whatever chance the future might hold. One night, Hirsch approached him again. "You're different," he murmured. "You're walking like a man who's carrying something?" Victor looked at him, the weight of Samuel's message still resting against his ribs. "I am," he whispered, "and I have to carry it out of here." Hirsch studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then, "Stay alive. A sight softly. Your brother gave you something. Don't let the camp take that too." Victor didn't sleep at all that night. He lay awake as the barracks breathed around him, the rhythmic rise and fall of weary bodies. For the first time since Samuel disappeared, Victor felt not only grief but direction. If only one brother left the camp, then Victor would make sure the world remembered there had been two. The boy who had worked with Samuel was reassigned 2 days later. No one said why. No one ever did. One morning, his place in the work line was simply empty. The space where he used to stand claimed by someone else, as if he had never existed. That was how the camp worked. It ate people and rearranged the remains, so the gaps were harder to see. But Victor remembered him. He remembered the rough sound of his whisper, the way he had carried Samuel's final message, as if it were a fragile object that could shatter if handled without care. The boy's disappearance only sharpened Victor's resolve. The camp wanted everything to turn into blur and confusion. Victor refused. He began to collect details the way Samuel had once collected bottle caps, obsessively, carefully, as if each one mattered. He memorized names, faces, accents. He noted who worked where, who was moved, who vanished. It was dangerous, this quiet cataloging, but it gave him a sense of purpose that no order could touch. In a place built to erase identities, he was building a map of existence. One evening, after a roll call, Hirsch sat beside him, joints creaking as he lowered himself onto the bunk. "You're watching," Hirsch said. "I see it in your eyes." "Someone has to," Victor replied. "Many have tried," Hirsch said, his gaze distant. "Not many stay sane long enough to carry it out. Memory is a sharp blade in a dull world. You'll cut yourself if you're not careful." Victor let the warning settle in the air. "My brother didn't get the chance to leave," he said quietly. "I won't let his story dissolve into fog." Hirsch studied him for a long moment. "You think you know what his story is," he said finally, "but you only hold your half. The rest is carried by those who saw him after you couldn't." The words struck Victor harder than he expected. He realized suddenly how much of Samuel's final days were a blank, a gap filled only with his imagination. Grief had written a version of Samuel's ending, but grief was not always truthful. "Did you know him?" Victor asked, surprised by his own hope. Hirsch nodded slowly. "Not well, but I saw him once after he'd been moved. It was in the yard between two barracks. He was helping a man who could barely stand, holding him up when guards weren't looking. I remember thinking that one will not survive long. He still believes people matter." Victor swallowed hard. That sounded exactly like Samuel. "What happened?" he asked. Hirsch shook his head. "I was taken away before I could see. But men like that, they burn fast. The camp doesn't tolerate warmth." The next days passed in a blur of labor and fragments of overheard news. There were whispers that the war outside was turning. Some said the regime was losing ground. Others argued that the camp would be emptied before any outsiders could reach it. Each rumor carried its own flavor of fear. Then, one mist-soaked morning, a new list was posted: a work transport. Men were needed at a different site, further from the camp, closer to factories still operating despite the chaos of the front. It wasn't freedom, but it was movement, and movement, once again, meant possibility. Names were read aloud. In the yard, Victor stood in the line, trying to keep his breathing steady, waiting, listening. When his name was finally called, It sounded foreign, as if it belonged to another life. "Victor Lewin," the officer said, not bothering to look up from the clipboard. A murmur rippled through the prisoners near him. Some looked at him with envy, others with sympathy. Being chosen for a transport could mean slightly better conditions, or it could mean disappearance under a different label. No one trusted anything. That night, back in the barracks, Hirsch leaned toward him. "If you go," he said, "you take us with you." Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" "You've been watching," Hirsch replied. "You've been collecting pieces. If you ever get to speak about this place, you won't just be speaking for yourself. You'll be speaking for all of us. For the boy who brought you your brother's last message. For Samuel. For the ones who will never stand in any courtroom, never write any testimony." Victor stared at the wooden beams above him. The thought was almost unbearable. He had been clinging to the idea of survival as something raw and personal, one man leaving because another could not. But Hirsch's words expanded the weight. If he survived, he would carry more than his own story. "I don't know if I can do that," Victor whispered. "None of us know what we can do," Hirsch said, "until there's no one else left to do it." The morning of the transport was cold and gray. Men were lined up near the gate, each given a number, a position in the column. Guards barked orders, trying to maintain control over a process they barely understood themselves. The war had twisted everything. Even bureaucracy sounded shaky now. As Victor took his place in the transport line, he turned his head toward the rows of barracks. He couldn't see Samuel, of course, but he imagined him there for a moment, leaning against a wall, watching, that small, lopsided smile on his face. "We're leaving together," Victor had said once. Now, standing with a worn coat on his back and a number around his neck, he realized something he had refused to admit. Leaving together had never been a promise he could keep. It had been a prayer disguised as certainty. The camp did not honor prayers, but maybe the words could still matter in another way. Victor closed his eyes briefly and reshaped the promise in his mind. Asterisk, if one leaves, both will be remembered. Asterisk, not as statistics, not as nameless victims, but as brothers whose lives had been interrupted by something vast and merciless, and whose bond had outlasted the place that tried to erase it. "Move!" a guard shouted, and the column lurched forward. With each step toward the gate, Victor felt the world tilt between endings and beginnings. Behind him lay a place that had swallowed his brother's body. Ahead of him lay uncertainty, so deep it almost felt like emptiness. As he crossed the invisible line between inside and outside, he felt no triumph, no relief, only a fierce, aching awareness of the absence walking beside him. If only one brother left the camp alive, Victor thought, then the other must never be allowed to disappear. Not in memory, not in history, not in the version of the story the world would one day tell. The transport site was a world within a world, different from the camp, but cut from the same cold material. Victor soon learned that this place was less rigid in its routines, yet harsher in its demands. The labor was grueling, the hours long, and the supervision unpredictable. Some days the guards barely looked at the prisoners, other days a single misstep triggered an explosion of anger. But the absence of constant structure meant there were moments, small, fragile pockets of silence where Victor could think without fear of being noticed. He worked alongside men from different regions, each carrying their own private history, stitched beneath exhaustion. A quiet man named Marek told Victor on their second week, "Here, the days blur. If we do not talk, even our names will drift away." So Tate talked quietly, carefully, about who they had been before. Not details that could be dangerous, just enough to remind themselves that they had once lived in homes with windows, not barracks with slats. Victor almost never spoke of Samuel, but Marek sensed something. One evening, while they were stacking crates near a dim lantern, Marek said, "You walk like someone missing a shadow." Victor didn't answer, but Marek didn't need him to. "Sometimes," Marek continued, "those we lose guide us more fiercely than those still alive." Victor carried that sentence through the following weeks like a small ember cupped in his hands. As winter deepened, the work grew harder. Supplies were scarce, even for the guards, and uncertainty seeped into every corner of the site. Rumors arrived like wind, and reliable but impossible to ignore. Some prisoners whispered that the front was collapsing. Others claimed there were movements of troops across borders. No one knew what was true, but the guards' demeanor began to fracture. Some became harsher, others distracted, as if listening for news they were not allowed to hear. One afternoon, Victor overheard two guards speaking in clipped, anxious tones. The words were brief, but their meaning struck him like a heavy blow. There had been raids near a nearby town. Approaching forces were getting closer. The guards didn't say what this meant for the prisoners, but Victor had lived long enough in captivity to understand the danger of transition. Rapid change rarely brought mercy. That night, Marek approached him with a serious look. "We must stay alert," he whispered. "If something shifts, even slightly, we need to be ready." Victor nodded. He knew what Marek wasn't saying. Sudden movements could mean transfers, evacuations, or worse. Yet the hope beneath the fear was unmistakable. The world outside was nearing. Then the walls around them might break sooner than expected. Days passed, strange, in their quiet tension. Then, without announcement, a new group of prisoners arrived disheveled, exhausted, their faces hollow from longer marches. Among them was someone Victor recognized vaguely from the camp, an older man with sharp, observant eyes who had once fixed the machinery near the yard. When their paths crossed, the man stopped, studying Victor. "You are Samuel Lewin's brother," he sighed softly, as if the knowledge itself required reverence. Victor froze. "You knew him." "I saw him," the man replied. "Not often, but enough." He hesitated, glancing around. "Your brother helped many." Quietly, he tried to shield a younger man from being selected. It cost him. His voice lowered further. He faced it with a courage that shook even the men who watched. The air left Victor's lungs in one uneven breath. He had imagined Samuel's final days 1,000 different ways, each one heavy. But hearing that Samuel had chosen compassion, that he had acted according to the kind of person he had always been, replaced some of the ache with a fragile thread of pride. He told one of the workers, the man continued gently, that if you survived, you would carry forward what he couldn't. "My brother sees clearly," he said. "He remembers." The words nearly broke Victor. He swallowed hard, unable to speak. In the following days, Victor worked with a renewed steadiness. Grief no longer pressed against his ribs with the same sharpness. It was still there, but altered, tempered by the knowledge that Samuel's final moments had held in tension not only tragedy. Victor felt as if he were walking with Samuel beside him, not as a ghost, but as a story that refused to die. One cold morning, a commotion rippled through the site. Guards rushed across the yard, shouting orders. Distant thunder echoed in the air, not from the sky, but from something mechanical, rhythmic, approaching. Prisoners exchanged tense glances. Something significant was happening beyond the perimeter. By midday, the routine had unraveled entirely. Guards moved erratically, gathering papers, arguing with one another. Some looked terrified. Others looked furious. The uncertainty spread among the prisoners like electricity. Marek grabbed Victor's arm. "Whatever this is," he whispered, "it will change everything." That night, long before dawn, Victor lay awake, listening to sounds he had not heard before. Not boots, not engines, but the distant hum of a world forcing itself closer. He could feel the shift, the way one feels a storm before it forms. He didn't know whether it meant survival or catastrophe, but he understood one thing with absolute clarity. He had come too far to let his brother's story end here. Even if only one brother had walked out of the camp, the truth of both would have to reach whatever new world was trying to break through the darkness surrounding them. The next morning arrived with an unnatural silence. No orders. No whistles, no barking commands tearing through the air before sunrise. The prisoners rose slowly, unsure whether to brace for punishment or prepare for something entirely different. Victor stepped outside the barracks and felt it instantly, a shift. The guards who usually paced the yard were gone. A few remained near the gate, but their posture was tense, distracted, as if their authority were evaporating beneath their feet. Marek approached him, voice low but urgent. "Something is happening. Look at their faces." Victor did. Even from a distance, he could see the strain in the guards' expressions. They argued in hushed tones, glancing repeatedly toward the road. Some carried bundles under their arms, as if preparing to leave. Others looked paralyzed by indecision. By midday, distant noises rumbled again, not like engines this time, but like movement across open ground. The guards reacted instantly, shouting conflicting orders. A few prisoners tried to understand what was happening, but the truth arrived not as explanation, but as a wave of sudden chaos. One guard threw down his weapon and ran. Another followed. Within minutes, the structure that had ruled every breath of their lives simply broke. The remaining guards panicked, some fleeing through a back gate, others locking themselves inside buildings. Marek gripped Victor's shoulder. "Do not run," he whispered. "We wait. We stay clear. Whatever is coming will decide for us." They stayed still, breath held, as the sound grew closer. Then, through the fog of uncertainty, figures appeared on the road, armed men approaching with caution. Scanning the perimeter, prisoners watched from behind fences and windows, unsure whether to hope or fear. Victor felt the tremor inside him. Not relief, not yet, but the awareness that something irreversible was unfolding. When the first unfamiliar soldiers stepped into the yard, the silence cracked apart. A guard darted out of a storage shed and attempted to flee. He was stopped instantly. More soldiers spread across the site, opening doors, calling out in languages the prisoners hadn't heard in years. Commands were given firm but not cruel. The men entering the camp did not shout insults. They did not strike. They simply moved with purpose, clearing each building with urgency. Marek exhaled a sound that was almost a sob. "It's over," he whispered. But for Victor, the meaning of over did not settle immediately. The routines that had shaped his daily existence were gone, but their weight did not lift. Instead, he felt suspended between two worlds, one collapsing behind him, the other opening in front of him with a blinding unfamiliarity. Hours passed before the fences were opened. Prisoners stepped out hesitantly, sun hitting their faces as if for the first time. Some laughed in disbelief, others crumpled to the ground, overwhelmed. Victor moved slowly, scanning the faces around him. He knew Samuel would not appear among them, but part of him still looked who's to be Sure. That instinct would never fully leave him. A soldier approached, offering him water. Victor accepted it with trembling hands. The man said something kind. Victor assumed, but the words blurred. Survival had become so deeply rooted in silence that kindness felt like a foreign language. Over the next days, medical workers arrived, distributing blankets, examining injuries, sorting people into groups. Officials asked names, origins, ages. Victor answered mechanically, watching as his identity was written down on paper for the first time in years. He noticed how many people hesitated before saying their own names, as if they were reaching for something smudged by time. Marek stayed close to him. "When they ask where you are going," he said, "what will you tell them?" "I don't know," Victor admitted. "You have someone waiting?" Victor shook his head. "Then you carry someone instead," Marek said gently. "That is its own kind of direction." Eventually, Victor was transferred to a temporary shelter. He was given clean clothes, a bed with real sheets, and a bowl of warm soup that brought tears to his eyes. But with comfort came something heavier, questions he had not allowed himself to ask. Who else had survived? What had become of the people Samuel had tried to protect? What did survival even mean without the person he had promised to walk beside? One afternoon, a relief worker approached him with a small bundle of items retrieved from the transport site. Among them was a scrap of cloth, 3 blue loops stitched together. The same message Samuel had sent. Victor held it carefully, as if it were made of glass. "Someone thought this belonged to you," the worker said softly. Victor closed his fingers around the cloth. "It does." Weeks later, he learned fragments of the truth from others who had been moved, transferred, scattered through the chaos. Samuel had not been forgotten. People remembered him, his kindness, his stubborn courage, the quiet way he helped those too frail to help themselves. Victor realized then that his brother's presence lived far beyond the boundary of their last conversation. In time, Victor resettled in a small town, far from the places that haunted him. He worked, repairing furniture, a trade he learned quickly. His hands, once forced into labor that stripped life away, now shaped objects that would be part of someone's home. He rarely spoke of the camp, except when someone needed him to. And when he did, he spoke carefully, not of numbers or statistics, but of faces, of choices, of the way humanity survived in impossible places. Every year, on the anniversary of his liberation, Victor walked to a quiet clearing at the edge of the woods and stood alone beneath the open sky. He would take out the piece of cloth, 3 simple loops, and hold it against his chest. "This counts as leaving together," he would whisper, not because both brothers survived in body, but because one had carried the other out in memory, in testimony, in the quiet determination never to let him disappear. History would know Victor Lewin as a survivor, but Victor knew the deeper truth. Survival was not the end of the promise. Remembering was.